Hi there, welcome to Going Deeper with Steve Arterburn. Thanks for joining me. You know, we've been doing this series on magnificent marriage because I do believe if you had two people working on a marriage, miracles can happen and it can be magnificent, but you have to have two, and sometimes, many times, you don't. We are so big on ourselves. We love to lecture. I know I do. I talk for a living. I love that. And I have attention deficit disorder. So I have a little bit of problem with what we're going to talk about right here today. But if you want a magnificent marriage, I'm going to challenge you to start asking more questions. All right. So here's a verse for you. James 1:19-20. It says, let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Usually we're very quick to get upset, very quick to share our anger with other people, and man, we don't care what anybody has to say. Well, in this concept of asking more questions, it's not just asking, it's listening. So I've got to talk about listening as well as asking. Now, whenever somebody asks me a question, immediately I feel like I'm the most important person in the room, unless I think they're trying to manipulate me or something like that. But really, it says so much to another person, how we value them when we want to know them, when we want to understand them, we want to know their perspective. So we want to ask. If you're married to somebody and you're always lecturing, always criticizing, always doing anything but trying to get inside their heart, then of course that marriage is never going to be very magnificent. Now, there's this thing called active listening. And now it's a communication skill. Most people have heard about this. You know, the person needs full attention. Now, if you give somebody their full attention, it means that you're present. You're listening. You're taking it in. You're there. You're not over here. The other thing you're not, and boy, I see this happening so often, you're not relating to the story in your head about the person. So a lot of times if I don't particularly like what's gone on in the relationship, or I'm thinking about some old thing that, I've had to get over, I can literally end up not relating to my wife, but relating to the story in her head, or in my head, about her. We have to surrender the story if we're going to be fully present. So we ask, and I would call this, and it's just something that I'm absolutely horrible about. We ask and we don't interrupt. Now, I got to tell you, I love debate. I love you think this, I think this. We go back and forth. And my wife just isn't that way. And so this is one of the most difficult things ever. And so I don't call this active listening. I call this active asking and surrender. So I ask, I listen, but to do it, I have to surrender. I have to give up my way of doing things, essentially dying to myself. And while I'm listening, I'm exploring some things in my head about what's being said. I'm thinking about it. I'm going to need to respond. If I'm listening and she says, and so I felt pain like ever before. Never before. Well, if I'm not listening, I'm just going to say, oh, well, that's really something. But if I'm listening and I'm there and I'm present, I'm going, oh, that must be terrible. Now, I have a hard time giving full concentration because of my attention deficit. Squirrel. I mean, there you go. In fact, the other day, I was talking to somebody and a squirrel was right over there. And I said, squirrel. They thought I was just kind of playing with them there, but actually there was a squirrel. So if I'm going to be an active asker and an active listener, guess what I need to be? I need to be safe. So if every time something comes up, I am very quick to make a judgment about it, give my opinion, and I get in the circle of I'm better than you. The I'm better than you is not a great circle to be in. It's almost as bad as I need attention from you circle. what I want to do is get in that circle of I want to be connected, I want to be equal, I want to have mutuality in our relationship to make it magnificent. Now, if I'm going to really be listening and engaged, there's appropriate touch that can really be beneficial. Now, here's the deal. If you go to Italy, they touch each other while they're talking. They touch each other about 5 times more in a minute than we do. And so you know the Italian with all their hand movements and a little tap here on the elbow, shoulder, whatever, you know that you're engaged in conversation. Just take a little side note here. You know, if you're ever helping somebody in the dating world, one of the great tips for a woman is to touch the guy that she's interested in. So if she's at Starbucks in the line talking, if she just finds a natural way to kind of touch his hand or forearm or something like that, just a little tap. Do you know what that says to a guy? Hey, I'm not afraid of men. I'm comfortable in your presence. I don't have a lot of baggage I'm bringing into this. It's really an amazing effect on other people. I told this to a single friend of mine who had made quite a commitment to singleness, and she started sweating, turned red, and so she just could not imagine that. But if you're able to touch your spouse while talking, oh, wow, I hear you, or just a little bit of indication of engagement, it goes a very, very long way. So I want to encourage you to do that if at all possible. Now, here's another thing. If I'm going to ask more questions, I ask a question, I hear the answer, I respond to it, but I might be confused by the answer. In fact, I might see it as something to take personally when she doesn't mean it that way. So I might want to say out loud, I'm a little confused here. Could you help me? And so if I can just get clarity and then say, so is this what you mean? Or this old thing that I hated when I was studying counseling in college. I hated what I hear you saying. I thought that was so contrived. So I really didn't ever want to say that to somebody, so I had to give it some flavor. So I don't say, what I hear you saying is, I go, so what I hear you saying is, or I say, so the very thing that I think you're trying to communicate. Any way I can do it, but I want my wife to know I hear you, I care about it, I'm interested in you. And the only way I'm going to do that is I'm going to be safe. So we talked about being present. You need to be safe. You really do need to be interested in your spouse. So if you're not, then you ought to ask yourself, why aren't I interested in my spouse? Is it because we've lost that loving feeling? Because all of the things that we could be doing, in addition to listening to each other, we've abandoned those. We've quit dating, quit having fun, quit playing together, quit enjoying food and drink together. We just don't have any good stuff going for us. Well, you need to fix that if you want to have that magnificent marriage. Now, it's really important when we ask questions that we not judge, but also that we don't interrupt and that we don't try to solve the problem. We don't make a judgment and we don't give a solution. You hear it all the time. We love to fix stuff. I don't think that's just men. I think women too love to fix stuff. When you hear there's a problem, you want to fix it. Well, I think rather than fix it, we want to validate. Oh, that must be horrible. Validate the feeling. That says, I have heard you. I'm validating. I believe it was tough, or I believe it was great, whatever. And then, you know, sometimes we have a tendency, because whatever's being shared, it might be a little bit painful for us. And so we might want to trivialize it or minimize it in some way. Oh, well, don't worry about that. Or, oh, well, everybody has that. Or, that wasn't really your fault. You shouldn't feel that way. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. So if we can surrender to the process of listening and asking questions, we really can build our relationship based on active asking and acting and listening, and then acting on what we hear. In other words, if I'm told that it hurts when I pick up the phone at dinner and let that interrupt all of dinner, next time it happens, if I reach over and turn it off or hit the button that turns off the ringing, that has a great message. It says, I heard you. I understood the annoyance that I've caused. I understand why it irritates you. I'm not judging that. In fact, I'm going to react to it. I'm going to respond to it, and I'm going to eliminate that from my life. What a great gift that is. And, here's another thing. Sometimes when a person shares, they don't exactly have the right perspective. It's going to be really tempting for you to defend yourself or clarify or whatever. Just don't do it. Listen, validate, and then hopefully, if this works, there's going to be a time for you to share some of your feelings, such as, when I heard that you thought that I flew off the handle, boy, that really hurt me, because as I remember it, I didn't fly off the handle. I just grabbed the handle of the door and opened it for you, whatever it would be. So clarity is important. One more thing. Sometimes it's more important to look for and to understand what's not being said than what is being said. And if I'm not a very good listener, then I don't know what's not being said. It's kind of like when you're playing hearts, spades, some card game. You know what's being played. You also know what has not been played. And that's really important if you want to win at cards. So maybe that's a way to remember, hey, I need to stop here and I need to think about, what isn't this person saying? And maybe I could ask another question about that. If you don't have anything to ask your spouse about, it's kind of an indication that the relationship is on life support. But why don't you just start with some really basic questions? Honey, I've forgotten what our first date was. I've forgotten your favorite food, your favorite color, your favorite dress. Ask some questions. And then maybe those questions will lead to some deeper questions where you're really trying to get at, what is this person feeling? What are they experiencing? How can I validate those feelings, which really helps a person feel so much acceptance. And if, as I'm listening, I could be evaluating the impact of my behavior on that other person, wouldn't that be a great thing? A lot of times people go through life and they're not listening to other people, they're not inviting comments, and they never ever hear a word about the impact of my behavior on you. Now, I can guarantee you the impact of my behavior on my wife a lot of times is frustration, irritation, all sorts of things. But we get together and we talk. We have a special place every night that we share. It's safe, nobody is there, and we do it on a regular basis. So I want to encourage you to find that safe place in your house. One of the things that I mentioned on radio the other day is a little saying that we have. Get curious, not furious. Whether it's our kids or each other, it's easy to get angry. It's easy to flip over there and just jump into rage, anger, bitterness, resentment, whatever. But rather than do that when I hear something, if I could say, now wait a minute, let's get curious about where that comes from. And maybe I'm not totally on board with that. Maybe I'm a little bit on board. Maybe I've produced a little bit of that problem. I'll know if I get curious and I ask about it. So that is my magnificent marriage model right there, closing up with the grand finale, the tough one for me, listening and asking a lot more questions than we do. Now, if you need some help, 1-800-NEW-LIFE, that's the number. You can go to Steve's social at newlife.com. If you have a comment, you want to send me a note, be happy to interact with you, try to answer your question. But I love getting to do this, and I'm going to be doing it again tomorrow. We're going to start a brand new series, and so I hope you'll join me then. And on behalf of all of us at New Life, thanks for going deeper with Steve Arterburn.